What's going on? This is Ryan with Automatic Comics, and up next, we are going to be talking about what type of value a Stan Lee signature adds to a major key comic. I put out a short recently about a Daredevil one that was signed by Stan Lee. Seemed to get a little bit of interest out there, so I thought I would do a little bit bigger of a deep dive into that with a bunch of big keys that recently sold in this Comiclink auction. Let's check these out. All right, so before we get started, please remember to hit that like button and hit the subscribe button if you'd like to see more content like this. So if you're not aware, there has been a pretty big Comiclink auction going on for the last week or so. They had a lot of big books, some cool stuff that's come up for sale, and one of the things that there have been a lot of are Stan Lee signed books. Now, signatures, the signed books are definitely a little bit of a contentious subject. Some people do not like them at all. They think that they are damaging the book, that it should lower the grade. Other people love them and pay a big premium for them. Some people say they would pay less or they would not pay anything extra for it. But part of understanding the hobby and what people like to collect is understanding different points of view about things like signatures. And there are definitely a lot of people that like to collect signatures and do pay that premium for them. And Stan Lee, even though he signed a lot of stuff, his signature still commands the biggest premium out of anybody out there. But I showed that Daredevil one in the short, and we'll talk about that one a little bit in this video as well. I picked out 10 different books that sold in this Comiclink auction, and I did not check these beforehand. So it's possible that some of these actually went for less than what you might think with the universal copy. But let's get into these. So what I did was I went to Comiclink and I searched for signed by Stan Lee, because that's what they generally use in their descriptor for the books that are signed by Stan Lee. So you could find all the ones that have sold in this auction. Now, I wanted to cover this relatively quickly because Comiclink, unfortunately, makes their sales data difficult to view and track pretty soon after the auction. So need to talk about it pretty quickly. But if we scroll down to the bottom here, we jump past the ones that are coming up in the next auction. We start to get to the ones that just finished. And the first one on here was a Amazing Spider-Man #1 in an 8.0. And so let's jump over to that book. So we'll take a look at this one, get a little closer look at it. I mean, an 8.0 is a really nice grade for Amazing Spider-Man #1 in the first place. Then add on that this one was signed by Stan Lee. Not the greatest signature. There's definitely a range in what you get with signatures for Stan Lee. This one's pretty kind of like blobby, and it's not even that late in when he was signing books, because I feel like as it got later and later, they were rushing and pushing more and more signatures, and but not a great signature. But this book sold for $58,000. So let's check that one out. So I'm over here on GPA. One of the things that you can select is signed books. You can get the results for signed books. If we go down and look at an 8.0, we can see that the last sale for an 8.0, I mean, almost a year ago, June of 2023, it's not a book that's going to sell that often, went for $52,000. So this one here went for $58,000. So at first you might say, okay, added $6,000 to the value of the book. But I actually think probably added even more than that, because I think if an 8.0 sold today, it would actually sell for quite a bit less than that. If we look at how this book has adjusted in price from sales from that time period a year ago, I mean, we look at a 6.5 went from 26,000 in that same kind of time frame down to 21,600. We had a 6.0 went from 19,000 down to 17,000. 5.0 actually went up 14,600 to 15,600. We had a 4.5, 12,000 to 11,000. So I would say anywhere from 10% to 20% drop from where it would have sold previously. Now, do I think that this one would drop down to 42,000 for an 8.0? Probably not. I think it would probably sell a little closer to 45,000, just based on where this book was selling back in this period. So I think 45, maybe up to 48,000. There was an 8.5 that sold in January for 66,000. That was actually a pretty big sale. But I think 45 to 48,000, meaning that this signature, at least by my estimate, added approximately ten to maybe $12,000, and that would be about 20 to 25%. And I know a lot of people will say, like, a Stanley signature will often add about 20 to 25% to a major key. And some people might not like it. Some people may say that they wouldn't add anything for it. But the sales numbers prove what it actually adds. And so with this book, at least, it appears to me that this probably added somewhere between $10 and $12,000 to the value of the book, or about 20 to 25%. All right, now let's check out the next one. We had Amazing Spider-Man 14 and a 7.0. First appearance of the Green Goblin. Again, not the best signature on there. When was this one signed? And this was signed in 2009. I mean, usually you often see some better signatures in the little bit older ones, but I mean, you can barely even tell that that's a Stanley signature. It's just kind of a blob on there. But still, a 7.0, Amazing Spider-Man, number 14. Let's check out what that book would sell for in a 7.0 unsigned. So we've got 4,456 that it went for signed. And if we look at a 7.0 unsigned, last sale 4,100. We had a 7.0 sign that went for 3,700 in December. What was this one again? This one went for 4,456. So this is actually a very strong sale. I mean, you can see here, this Stanley signed book actually went for less than the Universal in the same month. So again, it doesn't always sell for more. Or you could say maybe somebody got a deal on this one. But this one went for 10% more than the last sale, actually went for almost 20% more than the signed book sold just a few months ago. So actually a pretty strong sale, because I've talked about some of the weaker sales in a recent video. And so some people were asking, like, oh, does Comiclink, do those sales go lower? And I was like, no, I was just talking about some weak sales. They also have strong sales. Every auction house has weak sales. They have strong sales, all that kind of stuff. So, but yeah, pretty strong sale for this one. Went for about 10% above. Now, I do feel like that 7.0 sale was maybe a little high. I mean, you can see if you go into 2023, I mean, probably more like a $3,700 book. This $4,100 sale was a little bit high, in my opinion. And so if you said a $3,700 book today going for $756 more, again, that is about 20%. I mean, that's just my opinion, that I feel like this 4,100 is high, especially when you look at a 6.5 going for 2,561. That is a big gap. The prices are a little weird in this book right now. There's a lot of price compression here. I mean, look at this. You have a 5.5 going for 2,600, 6.0 going for 37, 6.5 going for 25, 7.0 going for 41. Like, these prices in this range don't make hardly any sense. Like, if you see that kind of thing, obviously aim for the higher grade. But yeah, I would, I think probably added somewhere between 10 and 15% in this case. But like you can see here with this sale, doesn't always do that. Sometimes actually might sell a little bit lower, or right around, since I think the 41 was high. All right, now let's check out Amazing Spider-Man 129. Now, this one is actually signed by Stan Lee and John Romita, but John Romita signatures, they just don't tend to add all that much value, like $50 to $100, something like that. So I think the focus can really be on the Stan Lee signature. So we had a 9.0 that went for 3,788. And if we go to Amazing Spider-Man number 129, we take a look at a 9.0. So we said $3,788 for this 9.0. If we look at a 9.0 Universal, last sale, $2,340. Let's see if that was maybe a little low. See where this book has been selling. I mean, not really. I mean, if we look at 2024 sales ranging anywhere from 2,127 up to 3,000, so probably around 2,500 right now. 2,340 might be a little low, but I'd say it's about a $2,500 book right now. And then if we look at that Stan Lee signed copy, went for $3,788, $1,288 more. That's like a 50% bump. Now, it is signed by both, so you maybe add a little bit extra for that, but still, that is a very significant sale. Let's see if there's any other Stan Lee. Yeah, so there was a $3,850 sale in July of last year. So a little down from that, but given how the prices of other books have dropped in this time frame, not bad. I mean, really, like, not bad. I mean, look at other 9.0s in that time frame. They've gone down pretty consistently. So I would say, like, in this case, it added at least like 40%. You could maybe argue even a little more, depending on how much you give to the combo signature on that book. But yeah, I think that was an extremely strong sale and a very big bump that was given to this book because of that signature. All right, let's move away from Spider-Man now. So we've got an Avengers #1, 5.0, signed by Stan Lee. Let's take a look at this one. the, Not the greatest signature. This is a tough book to sign. I mean, Stanley often seems like he signs in some of the worst places, like just like right on people's faces or obstructing things. But there's not a lot of real open space here where he could sign, like maybe down here, like above Ant-Man and on Hulk's leg, or maybe kind of like on Iron Man down near his body or something like that. But kind of sucks having it written right over the word bubble there on the cover. But a 5.0 went for 4,977. So let's check out Avengers #1, and we'll look at a 5.0 and see what a 5.0 universal copy would sell for versus this 5.0 Stan Lee signed copy. So we go to a 5.0. I mean, hey, pretty close. We had 4,950. However, again, let's look at what I think this book would actually go for. If we look at the price range here, hey, I mean, around 5,000 seems about right. I mean, we had a 5,100, 4626, 5699, 4950. Check out other grades. 4.5, way down at 3894, 5.5 at 5,900. I think this sounds about right. About a $5,000 book in a Universal, and this one went for 4,977. So this case doesn't seem like it added anything, at least in my opinion. So unlike the three Amazing Spider-Man books where it seemed like it added a pretty significant amount of value, I'd say this person kind of got the Stan Lee signature for free. It sold for about the same as the Universal. And, I'd say that was probably a pretty good buy. Let's see if there was any. Yeah. So here we go. We've got a Stan Lee signed copy that sold for 6,300 in December. Just in December, went for $1,400 more. This one, maybe someone was patient, got it for a pretty big discount. So I think that this was actually a great buy given the history of what Stan Lee signatures usually add, but in this case, didn't add anything. All right, now let's go to that Daredevil, because this was the one that I made the short about. So this was an 8.0 that went for $11,911. Again, take a look at the signature. I mean, none of these have been real great. I'll be honest, like none of these Stan Lee signatures have been great signatures. But we have an 8.0 that went for 11,911. And if you remember the short, if you happen to watch that one, you know that it added quite a bit of value to this book based on other 8.0 sales of Daredevil #1. And so if we go down and check the 8.0 here, you can see that last sale just in January, $9,300. And it seems like that's more or less around where this book would go. We have a pretty big range. We have a number of sales in the $9,000 to $10,000 range. Then we had an $8,000. That was all the way back in June, almost a year ago. Then we had this $9,300 sale. It seems pretty reasonable where this book has been trending recently. But then we take a look at that. This one added $2,600 to that price. Again, over 25%. This one, maybe like, I don't know, offhand, like 28%, 29% to the price of the book. So pretty consistent from what we've seen out of the first 5 books. The Avengers was the outlier, but the first 3 Amazing Spider-Man books, and then now the Daredevil book added quite a bit of value, anywhere from 20% to upwards of maybe 40 or 50% for that one ASM book. All right, now let's move on to Fantastic Four. Got a Fantastic Four #1, very similar signature. Yeah, I mean, I just haven't been super impressed with any of these. Now, this one is double signed. So again, take that for what it's worth. This one is also signed by Stan Goldberg. So you can see that signature right here. Very, very unique signature with that one. Almost, it feels like a kid that just wrote on the cover. Like, I feel like that's what Stan Goldberg's signature looks like. I remember when I first saw it, I was like, oh man, someone wrote on the cover. But then I was like, oh, it's actually a signature. There are a few of those out there where the signature is so blocky that for me, it really takes away from the visual appeal of the book. But let's check out Fantastic Four #1 and see what this book would have sold for probably without a signature. So we got Fantastic Four #1. This 4.5 went for $21,250. Let's see what a 4.5 would go for unsigned. So last sale, $19,250. And that was actually kind of a jump up there. We were as low in 2023 as $17,826, had an $18,000 sale. So a couple higher sales actually this year. Maybe the news around the Fantastic Four caused that. Who knows? But I would say on the top end, a 4.5 is like a $20,000 book. And I would actually think maybe a little bit lower than that. I think this 19,250 is about where that book should be, maybe even 19,000. But look at this one for 21,250. So it went for 2,000 more than last sale, at least 2,000 more than what I think the value of the book is. So that one's only 10%. Not quite as much of a jump for this one, but still a definite premium for that Stan Lee signature and Stan Goldberg signature on this book. All right, now we've got another Fantastic Four book. We've got Fantastic Four #4. Actually, pretty nice grade in this one, a 6.5. This one's signed by Stan Lee down here. These are all very simple. They must have all been signed around the same time, like 2009. Very similar looking signature. So let's check out Fantastic Four #4. See how this one did. So this 6.5 went for $4,603. I mean, that is so far down from where this book was during the comic boom. This book went absolutely crazy. So let's check out a 6.5. We have a 6.5 last sale, $3,400. This doesn't sell too often in grade, but we've had two sales right around there, around $3,400. Let's see where it was near the end of last year, $3,099. So I would have probably priced this book around $3,300. 33, 32, somewhere in that range for a 6.5. And granted, there's this really big sale here for a 6.0, but that feels like a big overpay to me. So $3,200, $3,300 for a 6.5. This one went $4,630. I mean, $1,400, $1,300 more. Again, added, in this case, about 30%, 35% to the value of the book. So, I mean, we're getting a pretty consistent story here with Stan Lee signatures with these books. And like I said, I didn't check these before, and I just picked 10 of the, other than the Daredevil, because I made the video about it. Just picked 10 of these books that were big keys signed by Stan Lee, and what type of value did it add. Now, this next one, will be interesting. I have no idea about this one. This is a 9.8 Rocky Mountain pedigree, highest graded, 1 of 4, signed by Stan Lee. It's about the best place to have it signed. It does kind of, I mean, again, it sucks having it over this big premiere issue, but otherwise you wouldn't be able to see it on this cover. Like, unless he signed it in white or silver or some other color, you wouldn't even be able to see the signature on this cover if it wasn't right there. So we have this 9.8, which I know some 9.8s. I think a 9.8 is sold recently. So Iron Man #1 in a Universal 9.8. I'm pretty sure one sold recently. So, yep, we had a 9.8 in January 2024, went for 28,800. Last year, we had one went for 27,000. Prior to the comic boom, around a 19-ish $1,000 book. So, I mean, I'd say right now it's around a $28,000 book. This one went for 28,251. So, really, no added value on this one. Now, it plus is the pedigree. And now the downside with the pedigree on this is that you can't get the gold, like the special gold label, the pedigree gold label, the signature label overrides it. So that's one little downside with it. But this is one where no added value. Now, I don't know if this book has sold before with a signed 9.8. Let's see. There's a Gene Colan one, but no. Oh, man. And here's when was this signed? Let's see. So, okay, this was signed in 2009. There must be two. There have to be two Rocky Mountain pedigree copies. That's crazy. Yeah, that's the only explanation for it, because it was signed in 2009. This is a Rocky Mountain pedigree from 2017 that is unsigned that went for 20,000. But yeah, in this case, so we've had a couple cases here where no added value. This one and the Avengers #1. So it could be maybe that at the 9.8 level, less people are interested. I mean, when you've got a niche market, which is a signed book, like there's definitely less people that are interested in signed books than unsigned books. And so maybe when you add that to the fact that this is a very expensive book, I mean, $28,000. Now, granted, we had an Amazing Spider-Man 1, also a very expensive book, but a 9.8, kind of a niche book in itself for a Silver Age book. Maybe that just reduced the interest in buyers enough that they were basically just paying the universal price. But I mean, I would argue that if you're getting a signed book by Stan Lee around the same price as an unsigned one, you probably got a pretty good deal. All right. Another big key here. Tales of Suspense, number 39, 6.5, signed by Stan Lee. Similar. Also signed by Gene Colan. I'm pretty sure that's who that. Yep. Yeah. So Gene Colan and Stan Lee. Yeah, similar blobby signature. I haven't really seen like a really good signature yet in any of these. They're rare. I mean, I've owned a few Stan Lee signatures over time, and I've only had one that I felt was like really good. So you don't come across them all that often. But check out Tales of Suspense, number 39. So we got first appearance Iron Man. I love this cover. I know some people don't like it, but I love this cover. I like the blue. This one, it's only got part of one of the quotes. Like when you hear people talk about double quote copies, it means they're talking about these two quotes here on the other side. It's just the wrap of the book, you know, how it was cut. And so people often look for the, you know, the double quote, and they look for this little bit of blue under the table here. There's just a sliver of it in this one. Sometimes it's completely cut off at the table and you don't have any of the blue. But let's take a look at Tales of Suspense, number 39. This 6.5 went for $18,250. Let's see what a 6.5 has been selling for. Last sale, $16,895. That was back in September. Let's see if we've got more recent sales. We have a 5.5 went for $15,200. So, I mean, that's high. Like, look at these prior sales. That was a big jump for that 5.5. 4.5 at $10,000. 5.0 at 11.4. Yeah, I mean, this 5.5 feels very high. I think that was probably more like a $13,000 book. And so, I mean, I'd say a 6.5. Somewhere around 16,000 doesn't seem too unreasonable. We got a 7.0 at 20,000 recently. So I'd say around 16,000. And then this one went for 18,250. I mean, 2,000-ish dollars more, not quite the 20%, more like around 11, 12% added for that, but still added value for the, you know, the Stan Lee signature. All right, now for the last big key we're going to talk about, and this one I thought was interesting. Someone actually commented on this one on my short, which is what made me decide to make this video. So thanks for making that comment. I do read them all. And so we've got X-Men number 1. This is an 8.0 that went for $57,000. Let's check out this signature. This is actually a pretty good signature. Like this one, it's like he didn't use quite as fat of a Sharpie. And so you can make it out a little bit better. I'd say this is, it's still not like a great signature, but of all the ones we've looked at today, I think this is probably the best one. And so we've got this 8.0 went for $57,000. Now I'll show you something, which is how we're going to know that this was a big sale. There was also an 8.5 that sold. It's an 8.5 that sold for $46,500. So this 8.0 lower grade copy with the Stan Lee signature went for over $10,000 more than an 8.5, half grade higher. And the 8.5 is actually, like, to me, not only is it the higher grade, but it has the better coloring on it. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, I've talked about this a few times before. With X-Men number 1, and it's not color fade or anything like that. You can have different color strikes on this cover. I've been talking about color strikes a lot. You can see the color strike on this copy is the lighter green color strike, which also tends to mean that the reds are a little bit lighter. This one is a darker green. And you can see, like, sometimes it also feels like the cover is a little more yellow on this one than this one. Sometimes it almost feels like it's an optical illusion. Like the darker green just makes the cover look whiter. Whenever I see these darker greens, the cover tends to look whiter. It looks better. And so not only is it just a superior copy in terms of grade and just visual appeal, but it sold for $10,000 less because of that signature. But let's go check out the pricing. Let's go see, you know, what the pricing is for this book. So X-Men number 1, and we're going to we'll check out that 8.5 too, just to see how that sale did. So if we go down to the 8.5, I mean, last sale, 58,800. Now that was quite a few months ago. Books have still been dropping, but I think this was a deal. Unless there's something like just horribly wrong with this copy. I mean, there's like a little like crease or tear or something right there, but I mean, it looks pretty good. You don't have the back cover. That's one of the problems with Comiclink. They only have the back cover sometimes. You can't see the back cover of this one. But I think whoever got that 8.5, I think they got a pretty good deal on that book. I mean, so 8.0 hasn't sold for over a year. It was 43,476, 7.5, 32,000. Yeah. I mean, I feel like this was a pretty good pickup. This 46,500. But man, that signature copy, like we look at what do I think an 8.0 would sell for right now? I think an 8.0 would probably sell for 39,000, maybe a little less than that, like 37,000. This one for 57,000. Like, I mean, I think this went for like $18,000 to $20,000 more than what it would have sold for if it wasn't signed. I mean, this added, I think, close to 50%, if not over 50%, to the value of this book. This one was a huge payment for this signed copy. This one actually does have the back cover. So you can see sometimes they have it, sometimes they don't. But I mean, if you want a Stan Lee signed copy, I mean, there's, even though people say he signed everything, you know, there still are a lot less signed copies than there are unsigned copies. I mean, if you look at the census, the CGC census, you can see like there's way more universals than there are signed, and they aren't all necessarily signed by Stan Lee. So I mean, I guess if you've been waiting for one and you had the money and you're willing to pay it, I mean, so be it. But whew, like that was a big pay. Like, I mean, I feel like this was an overpay. I mean, if you got the money and it doesn't matter, who cares, I guess. But I feel like this is a pretty big overpay for this signed copy, especially at least given my preference. And I think most people's preference to the darker green corner box being the superior looking X-Men #1. But yeah, pretty good buy for this person. Not pretty good buy for this one, in my opinion. But if you're happy with the book, that's fine. But I mean, that's all the books. I mean, I think that we saw pretty consistently here that the Stan Lee signatures on average are adding anywhere from 10 to upwards of 50% to the value of the book. We had 2 cases where they sold for around the same price. You know, we had the Avengers #1, that one sold for around what I think a 5.0 Universal would sell for. And we had the Iron Man #1 9.8 pedigree that I think sold for around what this one would sell for. But I mean, overall, Stan Lee signatures, whether you like them or not, whether you think it's damaging the book or not, or should lower the grade or not, there are enough people out there, enough collectors out there that are willing to pay that premium that they go for a pretty significant amount more than if they were unsigned. But hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit that like button, notification bell, all that kind of stuff. Like I said, I got the idea to make this video or this follow-up video from a comment that somebody made in the comment section. So if there's something that interests you, you know, like I said, I do read those. And if it's something I feel like I can make a interesting video about, I will. So appreciate the comments. If you want to watch more of my videos, got more videos over here. Got the subscription button right here. And I will see you in the next video.